but you probably remember it because the last time we did it, you were experts at it because we did a bunch in 4th grade too. What is plot? What if I add this to help you? Yes, plot is the main idea of the story. It's pretty much, it's the story. What happens in the story? Anybody remember what happens here when we are introduced to our characters and they are explained? Explained, it's the exposition. That is where we are exposed to our... That's where we are exposed to our characters. And oh, let me add, I almost forgot, how could I forget? What goes down here? What do you guys always like to draw down here? The roller coaster car! Woo! Okay, roller coaster car. Alright, so the roller coaster has to go up the mountain. So what do we call this? The rising action. And then in the middle, at the very top, the most exciting part is the climax. And then, that's the most exciting part of the story. So that's where our person has the most exciting moments, and then they have to come down. This is the rising action. What's the opposite of rising? Falling. Falling action. So they start to put things back together. It's when they're starting to wrap up the story. Okay, what goes down here? At the very end, it's the resolution. It's how things are solved. It's how the story ends, how everything ends up together, how it's all solved together. So this is our plot chart. You remember that? Whee! It's our roller coaster. But we're going to read a little bit more out of this chapter, and then we shall plot the plot of it. Okay, I'm going to work ahead and get my plot chart already drawn on there, ready to write. Alright. Alright, now I gotta remember where I was going to read. Okay. But Almanzo had no cant hooks and he had to load his sled. He found 3 straight poles to use for skids. Then with shorter poles, he started to load some on the smallest logs. They were 8 or 9 inches through and about 10 feet long, and they were crooked and hard to handle. Almanzo put Pierre and Louis near the ends of the log, and he stood in the middle like father. They pushed and pried and lifted and gasped and pushed the log up the skids. It was hard to do because their poles had no cant hooks, and they could not take hold of the log. They managed to load 6 logs. Then they had to put more logs on top of those. And this made the skids slant upward more steeply. Father's bobsled was loaded already, and Almanzo hurried. He cracked his whip and urged Star and Bright quickly to the nearest log. One end of this log was bigger than the other, so it would not roll evenly. Almanzo put Louis at the smaller end and told him not to roll it too fast. Pierre and Louis rolled the log an inch. Then Almanzo struck his pole under it and held it, while Pierre and Louis rolled it again. They got that log high up on the steep skids. Almanzo was holding it up with all his might. His legs were braced and his teeth were clenched and his neck strained and his eyes felt bulging out when suddenly the whole log slipped. The pole jerked out of his hands and hit his head. The log was falling on him. He tried to get away, but it smashed him down in the snow. Pierre and Louis screamed and kept screaming. Almanzo couldn't get up. The log was on top of him. Father and Joe lifted it and Almanzo crawled out. He managed to get on his feet. "Hurt, son?" Father asked him. Almanzo was afraid he was going to be sick to his stomach. He managed to say, "No, Father." Father felt his shoulders and arms. Well, no bones broken," Father said cheerfully. "Luckily the snow's deep," said John, "or he might have been hurt bad." "Accidents will happen, son," Father said. "Take more care next time." See, isn't that what we always talk about? How parents always say, "Be careful." Like, after the thing happened? Yeah, I know, I do it too. Yeah, see. Be careful. Men must look out for themselves in the timber. Almanzo wanted to lie down. His head hurt and his stomach hurt and his right foot hurt dreadfully. But he helped Pierre and Louis straighten the log, and he did not try to hurry this time. They took the log on the sled all night, but not before Father was gone with his load. Almanzo decided not to load any more logs now. He climbed up onto the load and cracked his whip and shouted, "Giddy up!" Star and Bright pulled, but the sled did not move. Then Star tried to pull and quit trying. Bright tried and gave up just as Star tried again. They both stopped, discouraged. "Giddy up! Giddy up!" Almanzo kept shouting and cracking his whip. Star tried again, but then Bright, then Star. The sled did not move. Star and Bright stood still, puffing out the breath from their noses. Almanzo felt like crying. He shouted, "Giddy up! Giddy up!" John and Joe stopped sawing, and Joe came over to the sled. "You're too heavy loaded," he said. "You boys get down and walk. And Almanzo, you talk to your team and gentle them along. You'll make them steers bulky if you don't be careful." Okay, so the reason why they won't move is because it's too heavy. Almanzo climbed down. He rubbed the yearlings' throats and scratched them around their horns. He lifted the yoke a little and ran his hand under it, then settled it gently in place. All the time he talked to the little steers. Then he stood beside Star and cracked his whip and shouted, "Giddy up!" Star and Bright pulled together and the sled moved. Almanzo trudged all the way home. Pierre and Louis walked in the smooth tracks behind the runners, but Almanzo had to struggle through the soft, deep snow beside Star. When he reached the woodpile at home, Father said he had done well enough to get out of the timber. "Next time, son, you'll know better than to put on such a heavy load before the road's broken," Father said. "You spoil a team if you let them seesaw. They get the idea they can't pull the load and they quit trying. After that, they're no good." Almanzo could not eat dinner. He felt sick and his foot ached. Mother thought perhaps he should stop work, but Almanzo would not let a little accident stop him. Okay, so that's just part of the chapter. Let's plot this on our chart. Okay, what did we say this first thing was called? Where we are exposed to our characters? Exposition. What happened in the exposition of our story? What happened in the exposition here? It was part of when we were doing our vocab stuff. Our exposition really happened. Father and Almanzo and the team are all going out to do the timber. They're going out to haul wood. Okay? But what else happened? We already knew that, but what else happened here? What was like the first thing that I read here? I even got an arrow in my book. Almanzo's trying to do some work here. Almanzo had no cant hooks and he had to load a sled. They explain how Almanzo, Pierre, and Louis are trying to get, see the picture here, how they're trying to get this log on to here. So in our exposition, we could say, Almanzo and the boys are trying to load the sleigh. Almanzo and Pierre and Louis try to load sled. Okay, so that is what when we were first exposed to our characters in this section of the chapter. Right? What goes here? As our person is going up the roller coaster. I put them over here this time. Whoops, I put their arms the wrong way. Oh, my bad. Whee! Okay, as they're going up, they're rising up to the top. This is the rising action. Right? What happened in our rising action? Right, let's go back and look. Alright, so we learned they were trying to load this thing up. They managed to load 6 logs. Then they had to put more logs on top of those, and this made the skid slant upward more steeply. Okay, so they're trying to load this. They've got it all full, and they're loading this up, and something happens. So what just happened? A rising action here is them putting the stuff on there. They have too many logs on here. They stack one too many logs on. Almanzo was holding it with all his might. His legs were braced and his teeth were clenched and his neck strained and his eyes felt bulging out when suddenly the whole log slipped. That's the climax. So what happened before that? They put too many logs on. Okay, they stacked too many logs. Okay, they stacked too many logs. And how did Almanzo describe himself there? His legs were braced, his teeth were clenched, his neck strained, and his eyes felt bulging out. Okay, so that's our climax. Almanzo is super stressed and a log falls on him. Log falls, I can spell, falls on Almanzo. At the climax. That's the most important, the most exciting moment of this selection, of this part of the chapter. Okay, so they start out, they don't have any camp poles, they're gonna try and figure it out together, they're working in the woods, and then they keep stacking the stuff on top of all these logs on top of each other, and finally they're lifting one that's too heavy, and it falls on Almanzo. Then they go on to describe what happens. The pole jerked out of his hands and hit his head. The log was falling on him. He tried to get away, but it smashed him down into the snow. So that is a big deal, especially because John says that he could have been hurt a lot worse if the snow hadn't been so deep. So that's our climax, is the log falling on him and Almanzo almost getting seriously hurt. Okay, what is our falling action? How does it go from there? Because falling action is the next part of our plot chart here. Okay, well, that is where first Almanzo is yelling at his oxen to move the sled. He's yelling, giddy up, giddy up, giddy up, and he's getting really frustrated. And then John tells him, hey, you have too much stuff on there and you need to calm down. So, oxen won't move. John helps him. Okay, so that's our falling action. We're working our way towards, what's the last part here? Need to make it bigger. What's the last thing here? The resolution. We're working our way to the resolution, how these things are solved. So, our climax is he gets hit in the head, and then his ox won't move. Okay, our falling action here, I'm actually going to move, our oxen won't move to the climax. Okay, as John helps him. John tells him that he needs to calm down and he has too many logs on his sled. Okay, and how does this part resolve? They get the wood to the house, and then Almanzo is too tired and too injured to eat food. But he powers through anyway. So, they get the wood home, eat dinner. And if you remember, if this triggers anything, back to what we were reading, what is one of Almanzo's favorite activities? Eating. Almanzo loves to eat. So if he does not feel like eating dinner, he must be really, really hurt. Okay, so think about that. That puts that into perspective. So how much of this book was spent on him describing food? A lot, because we always used to read, remember we used to read this before lunchtime, and I would be like, I'm so hungry. And I would be like, I'm so hungry. Yeah, so it's a big deal for him to not want to eat food. Alright, so look at that. We just plotted the plot. Okay, in our exposition, they talked about them loading the sled. In our rising action, they put too many logs on there. Our climax is it falls on him and then he can't get the ox to move. And our falling action is where